Hello, future RMTs. Welcome to the discussion of calcium homeostasis and hormonal regulation. Our learning outcomes are number one is to recall the function, biosynthesis, and metabolism of calcium in maintaining homeostasis. Number two is to describe the endocrine and organ physiology of calcium metabolism. And of course, to correlate laboratory results to clinical diseases states of calcium metabolism. First is we're going to discuss calcium homeostasis. To start with, remember that serum calcium A is maintained at a constant level. The purpose of maintaining the calcium level in a constant level is because uh, for excitability of neural and muscular tissues. Aside from that, calcium is being maintained at a constant level because of what we call nerve impulse transmission, muscular contraction, which includes the contraction of the myocardium, the blood coagulation together with magnesium, as these two electrolytes are important in the coagulation, for hormone secretion, and of course for intracellular adhesion. Remember, guys, that the cellular and tissue effects of calcium is greatly dependent on the blood calcium maintenance, but of course, within a specific range. Typically, an adult human contains 1,000 grams of calcium, okay, or 1 kilogram, no? And out of this 1,000 grams of calcium, 99% of this is hydroxyapatite. And the remaining 1% is for intracellular or I'm sorry, extracellular fluids, no? And that participates, no, or that regulates in various biochemical events. While the 99% or hydroxyapatite naman provides structural rigidity along with collagen. Okay? If we're going to discuss or to explore the distribution of various types of calcium in the body, we can say that 50% or more than half, or yeah, not more than half of the calcium in the circulation is in the form of ionized. Take note, in the form of ionized calcium. 40% of the calcium in the circulation or 40% of the calcium in the body or in the blood is protein bound. And when we said protein bound, these are bound into our plasma proteins. Okay? Plasma proteins, for example, we have your albumin. Okay? And the remaining 10% is complex, no? We have here your citrate and we have your phosphate. Now, remember guys that the only source of calcium in the body is our dietary intake. And the only way to excrete and to uh excrete no our calcium in the body is through our urination or through our urine. That's why don't never forget that a normal urine contains calcium. I still remember my students way back in, I guess, 2017, if I am not mistaken, when we are performing a calcium test for urine, and the urine test or the urine suggests a presence of calcium in the urine, and they got nervous because they don't know why calcium is, they get nervous because of the positive reaction of the urine test for calcium. But I want you to take note and remember that it is normal. No? Small amounts of calcium in the blood, in the urine, is considered normal. Okay, because it's the way of our body, the mechanism of our body to remove excess amounts of such calcium. Okay? Remember, guys, in the maintenance of our calcium, it is also important to have a regulated pH of the blood. Take note that there will be an increase in the binding capability of our calcium with a high pH. Thus, therefore, increase in binding requires an alkaline pH. Okay? And there will be decrease in the binding capability of our calcium in a low pH, which means in acidic pH, there is a decrease in the binding capacity of our calcium. Now, remember, guys, that there are six important organs or principal organs involved in our calcium homeostasis. We have our skin, we have our liver, we also have our small intestine, skeleton, parathyroid glands, and kidneys, each of which plays an important role in the metabolism and in the regulation as well as in the maintenance of our calcium homeostasis. Like what I've said a while ago, the only source of our calcium in the body is no other than our dietary intake. It is the only source, it is the only way we can have our calcium into our body. That's the only source that we can have. Remember, guys, that since ingestion or dietary intake requires metabolism, our intestine is the one capable of what we call the absorption of the nutrients, particularly in the small intestine. The organ physiology of intestine is to absorb our our calcium with the aid or with the help of our vitamin D, a hormone. Okay? Well, of course, if there will be an intestinal absorption of our calcium from our dietary intake, let's say, for example, from seafoods or from edible mushrooms or from milk, no, fortified milk, no, which is rich in vitamin D. Those are the things that we can have or we can acquire our calcium. Thus, therefore, it will have no a corrected or good calcium balance or calcium level. Our bone significantly contributes in the calcium homeostasis by acting as the repository. Okay? Repository, which means this is the organ or this is our organ, involved in saving. That's the other term, the simple term, saving our calcium. So that if there is a decrease in calcium levels in our blood, hypocalcemia, okay, there is a organ that will secrete the hormone or that will secrete the calcium, and that is our bones. Okay. Now, how about the kidneys? The major role of kidneys in our metabolism or in the homeostasis of our calcium level is to excrete excess amounts of our calcium. Thus, therefore, urine is the principal mechanism of outing, ilabas ang excess amounts of our calcium. In terms of hormonal regulation of calcium homeostasis, there are two principal hormones involved. Number one, we have your vitamin D. Yes, you heard it right. Vitamin D is an example of a steroid hormone that is derived also from our cholesterol metabolism. Aside from that, we also have your parathyroid hormone secreted and produced by our parathyroid glands. There are references or books stating that calcitonin is also involved, no? Calcitonin is also involved in the regulation in the hormonal regulation of our calcium. However, according to Bishop and other resources, calcitonin has no established function or a contribution in the regulation or in the hormonal regulation of our calcium in the body. Therefore, what we are going to give on emphasis and focus is the vitamin D and the parathyroid hormones. Again, like what I've said, vitamin D is an hormone derived also from the cholesterol. This is also an example of our steroid hormones. Primarily, our vitamin D, no, primarily our vitamin D are acquired by an individual from the UV rays, okay? From the UV rays of the sun. I want to make it clear to everyone. I want to make it clear to everyone that the vitamin D coming from that our what you call this, our understanding that vitamin D is directly coming from the sun is incorrect because the vitamin D from that we acquire it from the environment is really coming from the UV rays of the sun, not directly from the sun, but on the UV rays. That's why if you still remember when you were a child or when you have babies at home or neonates or infants at home, every morning pinaaarawan sila because of the vitamin D. Why? Because vitamin D is important in the metabolism and in the absorption of our calcium. Remember vitamin D as a hormone, no? Uh, shares a similarities with our steroid hormones as it is a byproduct or as this is a metabolic product of the cholesterol synthetic pathway. Okay, there are three major organs involved in the synthesis of our vitamin D, and as you can see in this illustration, we have the skin, we have the liver, and we also have our kidneys. The 7-dihydrocholesterol, no, from will be converted into the vitamin D3. Okay, and this vitamin D3 in the liver will be hydroxylized by the enzyme 25 hydroxylase to form your 25-OH vitamin D or your 25 hydroxy vitamin D. This 25 hydroxy vitamin D, no, will undergo hydroxylation in our kidneys through the help of the enzyme 1-alpha hydroxylase, which will give us our active metabolite of vitamin D, which is your 125 dihydroxy vitamin D. Remember, guys, that the bones, the gut, and the parathyroid glands are the tissues that is being affected or that is being regulated by our vitamin D and hormone. Okay? Again, remember, in the novosynthesis or in the synthesis of vitamin D, it started in the skin, no, where our 7-hydroxycholesterol is transformed into vitamin D by the action of our UV rays. Okay? Again, the skin is the location where the 7-dihydrocholesterol is being transformed into vitamin D3 by the action of our UV rays from the sun. Thus, it will be metabolized further through the help of the following enzymes until such the kidney will hydroxylize the 25 hydroxy vitamin D to form your 125 dihydroxy vitamin D, which is the active metabolite. Now, there are three specific tissues with vitamin D responses. Number one, we have the gut, our intestine for the absorption of the calcium. We have the bones for the repository of the calcium. And we also have the parathyroid for the release of the parathyroid hormone, which is also important. in the maintenance of our calcium levels. Now, aside from that, vitamin D can also be obtained from dietary sources such as fortified milk, multivitamins, and cod liver oil. Okay, there are factors affecting the synthesis of vitamin D. We have the sun exposure, the available sunlight, the skin covering, and the age of an individual. Take note as an individual age, no, there is a decrease in the synthesis of vitamin D. Vitamin D can be what we call vitamin D3 or cholecalciferol, which is scarcely found in the nature, and vitamin D3 is the form of vitamin D that can be found on the commercial milks. Vitamin D2, also known as the ergocalciferol, can be abundantly found in the edible mushrooms. Take note of this. Fun fact. As we all know, individuals who've been fed with breast milk is to be believed to be the one with strong immune system because of the milk that is produced in the mammary glands of the mother. But a fact states that a breastfed babies are at risk of vitamin D deficiency since breast milk is poor source of vitamin D. The other hormone that is responsible in the metabolism of our calcium is no other than our parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid gland was first described by Sir Richard Owen in 1852 from the dissection of an Indian rhinoceros that died in a London zoo. Okay? Parathyroid gland is typically ovoid or bean-shaped organ and approximately measures 3 to 3 millimeters. Unhealthy individual or normal individual may have 4 to 8 parathyroid glands. Sorry. Remember guys that the parathyroid hormone is secreted by our parathyroid glands in the region of our thyroid gland. Thus, therefore, if there is a problem in the thyroid gland, there could also be a problem that can lead no, that can lead into a problem of parathyroid hormones. Again, if there is a problem or abnormalities in the thyroid gland, let's say for example adenoma or autonomous productions of the thyroid hormones because of the adenoma or hyperplasia in the thyroid gland, it can also affect the production of our parathyroid hormones as our parathyroid gland is situated on the anterior of our thyroid glands. Remember that thyroid glands have what we call the CSR, okay? And this CSR stands for the calcium sensing receptors. Calcium sensing receptors. Calcium sensing receptors are important in the decreasing and increasing levels of the parathyroid secretion. Okay? Remember, guys, that the primary role of our parathyroid hormone is to stimulate bone resorption and the release of calcium in the blood. Parathyroid hormone also acts on kidney by increasing the fractional reabsorption of the renal tubular calcium and drive production of active metabolite. On the other hand, no, our parathyroid hormone is also important in promoting intestinal absorption of the calcium. And okay, and this function of our parathyroid hormone is mediated via specific receptors of the parathyroid hormone on those organs. Now, as you can see in this illustration, I have here, okay, I have here a diagram showing the release of our parathyroid hormones, showing the levels of our calcium levels of our calcium. Okay? Again, remember our parathyroid glands are equipped with what we called specialized cells called the calcium sensing receptors that are capable in the increasing and decreasing of the parathyroid secretion. Okay? Parathyroid hormones target cells as the bones and the kidneys. Now, in terms of our blood calcium level, if there is a rising of calcium level, it will suppress the secretion of the parathyroid hormone. Suppression of the secretion of parathyroid hormone can lead into decreased bone resorption, increased urinary loss, decrease in the 125 dihydroxy vitamin D production because of the decrease in the absorption of the calcium in the gastrointestinal tract because there is an increase in the level of our calcium. On contrary on that, in falling cases or falling number of our blood calcium, it will stimulate the production of our and the secretion of our parathyroid hormone. Our parathyroid hormone will act again on the bones and will act again on our kidney. Okay? On our bones, it will increase the bone resorption of our calcium so that it will normalize our blood calcium by secreting the calcium in the bone. It will also have decreased urinary loss so that there will be a increase in our blood calcium level. And since that have we have falling numbers or concentration of our calcium in the body, our gastrointestinal tract and the action of our parathyroid hormone will definitely increase the absorption of our 1,2,5 dihydroxy vitamin D in the GI. Now, there are three major effects of parathyroid hormone in kidneys. Okay? Number one is increase in the phosphate excretion. Increased phosphate excretion. Why? Because if there is increase in phosphate or hyperphosphatemia, it will inhibit the activity of our calcium. Number two, we also have increase in the reabsorption of renal tubular calcium. Increase in the reab. Why do we have to need why do we have to increase the reabsorption? Because we have loss of our calcium. Thus thus we can't afford to lose to secrete our to excrete, not secrete, to excrete our calcium because we have to maintain it at a constant level for the following reasons: contractility of the muscle and tissue. Okay? And last action or effect of our parathyroid hormone in the kidney is enhance 1 alpha hydroxylation of the 25 hydroxy vitamin D so that, okay, wait, I will write. Enhance 1 alpha hydroxylation. Why? Why the parathyroid hormones enhance the kidneys and the hydroxylation of our 25 hydroxy vitamin D so that it will convert our 25 hydroxy vitamin D into its active metabolite, and that is SOR1 25 dihydroxy vitamin D, which will have effects or which will target our gut, our bones, and our what you call this? The gut, the bones, and the GI. No, the gut, no, the gut, the bones. okay, for the maintenance of our calcium. Now, in terms of the organ system regulation of calcium homeostasis, again, we have what we call organs involved. Number one, we have your GI. It is important for us to take note that a normal intestinal function will absorb our calcium level at a normal state. Therefore, if there are abnormalities or problems in our gastrointestinal tract, it can also lead into a problem to our to the absorption of our calcium. Let's say, for example, short bowel syndrome and genetic or physiologic defects will have a negative effect on the calcium homeostasis. Take note, you know, take note that dietary calcium bind in the intestinal lumen to form to form insoluble and non-absorbable precipitate, and that is your calcium phosphate. Remember, calcium phosphate is an indicator of a kidney failure. That is a crystal, as you can see here, that can be seen in a patient with kidney failure. No, calcium phosphate is insolubility of calcium. The insolubility of calcium phosphate, by the way, is the basis for the use of calcium carbonate as phosphate binder in a patient with kidney failure. Okay. Now, how about our kidneys? Like what I've said a while ago, our kidneys is the one responsible for hydroxylation of our inactive vitamin D to form its active metabolite, and that is your 1,2,5 dihydroxy vitamin D. Therefore, if there is an impaired function of our kidneys, it will also resulted into the impaired hydroxylation of the active metabolite of our vitamin D, which is important in the maintenance, no? And hormone important in the maintenance of our calcium level. Therefore, a patient with this diseased kidney will also have impairment in the calcium metabolism. Take note of that. A patient with kidney problem will also have impairment in the calcium metabolism. Thus, therefore, we can observe that there is an abnormality in the calcium levels and the phosphate levels in the other electrolytes of a patient with CKD or even in any other kidney diseases because of the functions of our kidney is impaired. Take note also that a patient with chronic kidney or renal insufficiency will be associated to osteomalacia because of the uh, problem, no, in the metabolism of our calcium. Okay, and when we said osteomalacia, this is an inadequate bone calcification. Okay, bone calcification, bones becomes brittle, and osteomalacia is a problem in a bones because of the problem in the calcium metabolism. The counterpart of our osteomalacia in children is what we call the rickets. Now, showing to you the pathophysiology of CKD, no? Just a review of our kidney function. Right? Remember, a chronic renal failure can lead into failure of ion homeostasis. This failure of ion homeostasis can lead into phosphate retention, hyperphosphatemia, which can lead into inactivity or inability of our calcium to have its activity. Okay, why? Because increase in phosphate will inhibit the activity of our calcium, leading into what we call hypocalcemia, okay? Leading into what we call hyperparathyroidism. Okay? Remember, Hyperphosphatemia is a powerful stimulus for the parathyroid gland and the fibroblast growth factor 23, also known as the FGF23 secretion. Now, what do we mean by FGF23? That is a powerful phosphatidylic hormone secreted by the osteocytes. Now, why do we have increase in parathyroid hormones in cases of chronic renal failure or CKD? Number one, because of the critical levels of calcium and phosphate is rich. Number two, because of the precipitation of the minerals that occurs in the tissue is the reason why our parathyroid hormones are increased. Thus, therefore, leading into what we call bone resorption. Well, aside from that, chronic renal failure can also lead into a problem into its endocrine function. Number one is primarily the loss of the production of the erythropoietin, which is important in the production of the red cells. That's why a patient with chronic renal failure or kidney failure will have what we call severe anemia because of the loss in the production of the erythropoietin or EPO, which is important in the production of red cells. Aside from that, the conversion of our vitamin D to its active metabolite. And since there is deficiency in the active metabolite that is important in the absorption of our calcium, it also lead into what we call the hypocalcemia. Now, aside from that, sodium retention, mataas ang sodium, mataas ang water level, it will lead into what we call hypertension. Alright? Kung meron tayong sodium retention, mataas din yung ating water level, which means there is a probability that the patient will develop edema. It can be pulmonary edema, excess water is not excreted but rather deposited in the tissue, peripheral edema. Pulmonary edema, water, excess water starts to accumulate in the pulmonary area. That can also be a lead factor of what we call accumulation of the fluid in the pericardium or pericardial cavity that can lead into what we call transudates, a protein-rich effusion. Kaya meron ding hypoproteinemia ang pasyenteng meron chronic renal disease because the protein in their urine, kaya siya ay mayroong proteinuria and hypoproteinemia or albuminemia. Okay? At itong pulmonary edema can also, like what I'm saying, cardiac, can also what we call yung congestive heart. And since there is a chronic renal failure, edi alam natin merong acidosis because of the problem in the reabsorption of the bicarbonate that buffers our pH. Loss of water balance, polyuria, sometimes anuria, total cessation of the urine, total cessation of the kidney function, anuria. No? And since we cannot remove toxins in the body that is being synthesized by metabolized or detoxified by our liver, si kidney ang mayroong capacity to excrete those. There will be what we call retention of toxic waste or endogenous toxins that can lead into what we call encephalopathy or worst case scenario, comatose that can lead into a death. Other problems, We have pericarditis, pancreatitis, colitis, thrombocytopathy that can also lead into a bleeding tendencies. Kaya tandaan mo, mahalaga yung kidney mo. Okay? Now, how about the bones? The bones, there are two major types of bone in the skeleton. We have the cortical and we have the trabecular. When we said cortical, this is primarily the type of bones in the long bones. Example, the femur, no? Which is strong and rigid. And when we said trabecular bones, these are our axial bones or skeleton, no? And has a many crosshair type, the trabeculate that provides strength and elasticity. The major function, no? The major function of our bones is to the keep, no? Repository siya ng ating calcium. We have what we call bone turnover or remodeling. These are coupled processes of simultaneous bone formation and breakdown occurring throughout the life. Now, bone formation is what we call bone formation is what we call osteoblast. Bone formation is mediated by osteoblast. And bone breakdown or resorption is what we called osteoclast. Okay? Take note, no, bone resorption or bone breakdown is osteoclast. Take note that when resorption exceeds formation, bone mass decreases, thus it can lead into a high risk of fracture. Natin matatandaan that bone osteoblast is for formation and osteoclast is for resorption or breakdown. Osteoblast, blast, bubuo, osteoclast, sisira. Okay? Osteoblast, bone formation, bubuo, osteoclast, bone breakdown, sisira, bone resorption, sisira. And take note, when our resorption exceeds formation, okay, bone mass decreases, that can lead into high risk of fracture. Okay? Now, what are the calcium disorders? We have definitely your hypercalcemia and we have your hypocalcemia. So pag sinabing hyper, edi mataas. Pag sinabing hypo, edi mababa. Okay? Now, what do we mean by calcium or hypercalcemia? Take note, guys, that blood calcium levels are above when there is what we call hypercalcemia, above than our normal range. Remember also that the binding of calcium to other substances must be taken into account when considering the total calcium levels. Number one, when a patient has a low serum albumin, therefore, it will be expected that the patient will also have decrease in the total calcium. However, normal ionized calcium. Why? Why there will be decrease in total calcium? Kung mababa ang ating albumin. Decrease in the albumin can also be expected that the patient will have decreased total calcium. Ano ba yung ating mga calciums in the body? Ionized, bound, and complex. Our bound is bound to plasma proteins, no? And that proteins is your albumin. Mababa yung albumin, mababa din yung calcium level, yung total calcium level. To be specific, is the bound calcium. Kasi yung ionized mo, wala ka namang problema doon, normal siya. Well, opposite naman, or on contrary, if mataas ang ating albumin, eh di mataas din ang calcium, particularly the bound calcium. Okay? Remember guys that the parathyroid hormone is also responsible in hypercalcemia. Primarily the primary hyperparathyroidism. Primary hyperparathyroidism. It is the most common cause of our hypercalcemia. Okay? Why? Bakit ba mayroong primary hyperparathyroidism? Because of the autonomous production of the parathyroid hormone. Maybe because of the adenoma, hyperplasia, or carcinoma. Okay? Another cause of hypercalcemia is what we call hypervitaminosis D. Mataas yung level of vitamin D, which is caused by excessive intake of vitamin D or the aberrant production of the active metabolite of the vitamin D. Cancers and tumors can also be a factor of a hypercalcemia because of the release of hormones or hormone-like substances that stimulates no, the absorption of the bone to produce and to release our calcium. Okay, aside from that, we have the granulomatous diseases, medications, Williams syndrome, and chronic immobilization. What do we mean by Williams syndrome? Williams syndrome is a developmental defect that affects many parts of the body. Okay? This is a condition that affected the intellectual ability of a baby, of a adult, of a person. Thus, therefore, it also affects the learning capability of an individual. Okay, there is a distinctive facial features as you can see in the illustration, but I have to block the eyes of the baby for confidentiality, even though this is um, available in the internet. Aside from that, there will be what we call the heart and blood vessel problems that can lead into what we call cardiovascular diseases. Now, how this problem or how this Williams syndrome occur? It is caused because of the deletion of the gene material or genetic material, particularly on the chromosome, 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 chromosome 7. There is a deleted region, no, includes the 26 to 28 genes that leads into what we call Williams syndrome. So why is it associated into what we call hypercalcemia? Because Williams syndrome is also referred as the hypercalcemia supravalvular aortic stenosis. I'm sorry, supravalvar pala, hindi pala valvular, valvar aortic stenosis. Okay? That's why a patient with Williams syndrome will also have increase in our calcium. Now, these are the signs and symptoms of a patient with hypercalcemia. For the central nervous system, lethargy, decreased alertness, depression, confusion, forgetfulness, abduction, and coma. Abduction pala, and coma. For GI, anorexia, constipation, nausea, and vomiting. For renal, impairs kidney ability to concentrate urine, leading to dehydration, increased risk of kidney stones because of the formation of calcium phosphate or calcium oxalate. Skeletal, increased bone resorption, increased bone demineralization, and risk of fracture. For cardiovascular causes or exacerbates hypertension. Now, these are the laboratory findings for the differential diagnosis of our hypercalcemia. Biochemical findings with primary hyperparathyroidism includes your hypercalcemia, hypophosphatemia. Take note that parathyroid hormone induces phosphaturia or phosphaturia rather. And it leads into what we call hypophosphatemia. Mababa yung phosphate sa blood. Elevated parathyroid hormone relative to serum calcium. Okay, there is an appropriate normal parathyroid hormone in the face of hypercalcemia. Low normal 25 hydroxy vitamin D and high or elevated no 125 dihydroxy vitamin D due to the parathyroid enhancing renal hydroxylation. It will also be urinary calcium secretion is elevated, metabolic hyperchloric choloremic acidosis, and elevated serum alkaline phosphatase in severe diseases. Okay? At other conditions that can lead into hypercalcemia is what we call familial hypocalciuric hypercalcemia, which is a benign condition, no? And this is due to a germline mutation in the CSR of the parathyroid hormone of parathyroid gland. However, this is a stable, mild hypercalcemia from birth that can also lead into hypocalciuria. Hypertension, hyperparathyroidism is also a factor for hypercalcemia because of the direct effects of thyroxine on the bones, which increase the resorption of calcium that can lead into what we call the hypercalcemia. Okay? While parathyroid hormones are low. In Addison's disease, parathyroid hormones are low. We also have our milk alkaline syndrome, which is a result of the ingestion of large amount of calcium together with absorbable alkaline. Medications such as the use of thiazide diuretics, lithium, and vitamin A can also promote the hypercalcemia. Why? Thiazide diuretics is used to treat hypertension, which causes the retention of glomerullarly filtrated calcium. Our lithium is a medication for bipolar disorder. No, it is used to treat bipolar disorder. Okay, which sets the point at calcium sensing receptor, which increases the production of our calcium. Vitamin A, on the other hand, believed to be the activate or believed to activate osteoclast and enhance bone resorption, elevating the blood calcium, parathyroid hormones are suppressed. Renal failure can also lead into hypercalcemia. Okay, due to the production of active formation or excessive production of vitamin D is limited. Okay, how about hypocalcemia? A hypocalcemia is to assess if the patient is experiencing hypocalcemia. No, it is best measured by using ionized calcium. Signs and symptoms of hypocalcemia includes tetany in the hands, feet, legs, back. No, we also have what we call the Chevestek sign, numbness and tingling of in face, hands, and feet. The patient also experienced irritability, seizures, personality change, and impaired intellectual functioning. In cardiovascular, there is what we call prolonged QT uh, complex and electromechanical dissociation. Okay? In hypocalcemia, parathyroid glands, no, when functioning properly, will not only correct failing blood calcium but also prevent it by increasing the parathyroid hormones. Okay, the features that thing distinguish the secondary hyperparathyroidism from primary hyperparathyroidism. Now remember guys that the parathyroid glands are functioning properly no, in cases of hypocalcemia. Increased PTH is appropriate mechanism. Now, what are the causes of hypocalcemia? There are three causes. Number one, we have endocrine, organ system, and medications. For endocrine, we have what we call hypoparathyroidism as a result of the surgery, no? Removal of the parathyroid glands or even removal of the thyroid gland. This can also be due to the autoimmune diseases or autoimmune uh, destruction of the parathyroid tissues that can lead into the problem in the production of the parathyroid gland. A mutation in the parathyroid gene and abnormal deposition of the and aluminum in the parathyroids. Other cause of endocrine is we have the pseudo hypoparathyroidism, which means there is what we call lack of the responsiveness of the parathyroid hormone. Hypovitaminosis D is also a factor for hypocalcemia. Yung isa, hypervitaminosis D sa hypercalcemia. Okay? Now, for organ causes of hypocalcemia, we also have what we call the intestinal disorders. Okay? Intestinal disorders resulting into the adequate calcium or vitamin D absorption. Like what I've said a while ago, the short bowel syndrome, no? The dumping syndrome, and the celiac syndrome. We also have what we call threatened hypocalcemia. Renal insufficiency or renal failure can also lead into what we call the hypocalcemia because of the result of hyperphosphatemia and the defect in the metabolism of the vitamin D because of the loss of the function of our endocrine function of the what you call this kidney. Genetics can also be a factor for hypocalcemia. Now, for medications, we have the antireproceptive agents. Lithium can also affect the production of our calcium. Now, for metabolic bone diseases, we have what we call the rickets and osteomalacia. These are caused by the abnormal bone mineralization and vitamin D deficiency. As you can see, this is a normal or a healthy bone, and this is a decalcified because of the bone mineralization and the deficiency in the vitamin D, no, that can lead into what we call rickets. Rickets occurs in the bone, no, in the growing bone, no. Rickets occurs in the growing bone, and that is a deficiency of vitamin D in children. The counterpart of rickets is osteomalacia, okay? That occurs naman in the bones of the adult. Now, after the closure of the epiphyseal, ayan, nabulol, epiphyseal plates, and there is no bony deformities. We also have what we call osteoporosis, which is prevalent metabolic bone disease in adults and estimated that 20 to 25 million of Americans with 4:1 female-male ratio. Predominant ang osteoporosis sa babae. There is an hypothesis stating that the reason why osteoporosis is prominent in female because they lactate. Okay? This is an example, or this is the structure of a bone with osteoporosis, and this is a normal bone. This is an example of an X-ray showing a bone of a patient with osteoporosis. Well, in order to prevent osteoporosis, adequate dietary intake of calcium and vitamin D is necessary. Okay? And I would like to end this session, I would like to share to you the words of Gro Harman Brundtland, stating that although approximately 80% of osteoporosis sufferers are women, as the longevity of the male population increases, the disease will assume increasing importance in men. Hey, thank you very much. And do not forget to scan the code and like this video. Okay? To end this, again, my words are mabuhay ang mga METEG students patuloy na lumalaban sa kabila ng mga pagsubok. God bless you all.